Hello everybody, welcome to episode 17 of making an online Pokemon game. If you remember last time we worked on the camera system, so if I run this quickly we have a camera that looks pretty good. I looked into the bug where every once in a while when I turn it will kind of jitter around. I still haven't figured out the issue exactly. It could be really anything at this point, but it's hard to pinpoint really. So instead we're going to work on room transitions. So I have it set up so that it's going to be where if we move over to the left here, we'll be able to move to another zone, another area of the world. Since we don't want everything just taking place in one room, we'll be able to have multiple rooms. To start off with, you will need a room itself. So I just on the side created a room with some trees in here. The right side matches up perfectly with the other room's left side, so it'll have a nice transition. You don't need any objects in the room except colliders, so placing some colliders. Other than that, you don't need a network object, you don't need the start objects, nothing. You just need the colliders for now. We will be creating a transition object that you'll place in, but we'll do that together. In fact, if you go to your terrain, we're going to organize our terrain folder a little bit. So we'll create a group here for objects, and then we'll create another group for our assets. The objects are basically things that can be placed in the room, while assets will be the things that are actually displayed. So like our sprites and our tile sets. So I'll put all the objects in there, and then in the assets, let's create a sprite here. It'll be for the transition. Let's resize it to 32 because that's what everything else is set to. We can edit this and we'll just make it a blue color, and I'm going to set the opacity down. Now we're going to do something weird with this. So I'm going to create another layer and I'm going to copy and paste this so that we have multiple frames. I couldn't think of a better way to do this, so this is just what I'm going to do. I'm sure you could probably do it in a slightly better way, but I kind of like this. So I'm going to use the text tool and set my color to white, and then I'm just going to write out some numbers with a smaller size probably. Okay. And it doesn't need to be perfect, just get some numbers written out here. And just do every frame, just put in a new number. And that was way off. Okay, it kind of bothers me when it's not a line. Yeah, when it's not a line, it kind of bothers me. And that's not even a 5. Whatever. 5 is just the wonky one, I guess. But yeah, you can do this as many times as you want. And you'll see why we're doing this in a second. You don't technically need to do this. It's just for my sanity to see what's going on in the room. So now we just have a bunch of numbers lined up like that. And what you're going to do is go into your objects, and we're going to create a new object for this now. So I'm going to do Alt-O, not Control-O. And this will be O transition. I'm going to set this to be that sprite, and I'm going to go to the create event, and I'm just going to set the image speed equal to 0. Alright, and now in the objects for the client room for the first one, what you're going to do is you're going to place this object into the room, into the instances layer. So here's our transition, and I'm going to actually delete that. What you're going to do is you're going to double click this and go into the creation code for one of these transition objects, and you're just going to return room or client room 2. So this is going to return whatever room you want to go to. So this object right here, this transition, connects to the transition room, the second one we created. So not this room itself, but the other room that we want to go to. Alright, and then you're going to set the frame here, down here. You can set the frame to whatever identifier you want this to be. And I accidentally set the scale to -1 somehow. So I'm going to copy and paste this 2 more times, and then double click the second one, and I'm going to set the frame here to be 1, and then set the frame here to be 2. And this is why we had those numbers, is so that we can see the numbers now. So we can see the numbers pretty easily now. so we can see where they line up. So if I go into my other client, my other room now, I'm going to do the same thing. And I don't think I can paste it. Oh, I can. Okay. So I'll double click this, go to the creation code, and instead of returning client room 2, this will connect to the other client room, so just regular client room. And close that, and copy and paste this 2 more times, and then set the frame to be 1 and 2. So the reason for the identifiers, the numbers, is that if I collide with this middle box right here, I want the player to go to this middle box on the other side. And likewise, if I connect to the one with ID 2, it will go to this room, but I want it to move to the object that has ID 2. So this way it knows which, even though it's going to this room, it knows where to place the player. And you can make as many of these numbers as you want. It doesn't really matter. It didn't even have to be with frames. You could have done it in multiple different ways, but I just kind of like this because then I can visually see 0, 1, and 2 on the room editor itself. Alright, and now we're going to basically be doing the same thing that we did with the collider, but we're going to be doing it with a new object. And this is going to be another singleton, so we'll do Alt-S to create not a sprite, every time. Alt-C to make a code block, and this is going to be our metadata. So our meta objects, we'll call it. So these are all the objects that are basically handled by the server. I could have placed my colliders in this kind of object too, but I feel like colliders are a big enough thing that they can have their own dedicated class. So this is going to have a macro for meta objects, which will be a get meta objects function. Then we'll create a function for meta objects. This is this object, so it's going to be a constructor. And then we need the function for get meta objects. And to make this a singleton, it's got to be static mo for meta objects equals a new meta object, and then return mo. So eventually we'll also have this deal with the player start object, but for now, since that's already working in a way we want, we'll leave it. But for now, let's just get our transitions. So we're going to do this in a slightly different way than the colliders, because our colliders, we just use a DS map, I believe, not a map, a grid. But we're going to use a grid and a list as well. No, a grid and a map actually. But we also want to grab data not just from one single room, but from a collection of rooms. So we're going to get data out of the client room and client room 2 and any other rooms that we end up creating in the end. So we're going to store this data, and not in one of those, but in a map itself. So we'll call it data equals ds map create. We need an init function, just like with the collider. So init equals a function. And this is going to initialize our data. I'm going to create a static variable for rooms, and it's going to be an array, and this will contain every single room that we want to include in our data, any room that we may be able to go to. So we'll have a client room, and for now just client room 2. And if we need to add more rooms, all you have to do is add them to this list. Whoops. Alright, for var I equals 0, I is less than array length rooms I plus plus, var rm equals rooms I, so we'll store that in a variable. Alright, and then we need our data, and I'm going to use the access or question mark to say data, and we'll just use the ID for room. That should be fine. So we're going to store some data inside of this room object, and it'll just be a straight up object. And we're going to store two things. We need our transition, so we'll call it transition map, and we're going to create also a transition grid. So transition grid, and this will be a ds grid create and a ds map create. So the reason we're storing it in all the data in a map and a grid is because it allows for easier access. So we can either access transition through a position, like an X and a Y position with the grid, or through its ID using the map. And this needs a width and a height as well. So how do we get the width and the height for the grid? Well, we do the get info, so the room get info, if you remember. It goes room get info using whatever room this is, so RM. And then the width and the height of the room is going to be info.width, and we're going to divide it by grid size. Normally I would do just div, but in this case I'm actually going to seal this instead of floor it, just so that if we have a fraction room size from our grid, we include the extra grid position. So divided by grid size. Alright, so that should create our map and our grid. So now we need to actually populate the map and grid with some data. So for that, I'll just create a separate function to handle that. So we'll say populate transitions equals a function, and we'll pass in the room, the map, and the grid. So right after we declare this, I'm going to also call populate transitions with the room, and then we need to pass in data room dot transition map and data room dot transition grid. And let me just put these on new lines so it's slightly easier to read. So we create the map and the grid, and then we're going to call this function populate transitions with the room, map, and grid, so that we can just go through each room and find all the transition objects that exist and get the data from them. So how do you get the data out of it? Well, we have that one handy function to get all of the objects. So get objects of room, and we'll actually store this in a variable. So var trans equals get objects of the room we need, and the object is going to be O transition. So get every single object transition out of the room. And I realized this is giving me an error, so what I'm actually going to do is come into this get objects of room function, and I'm going to make this a little more professional. If I can remember how to do this, I believe we can say at parameter, and if we do curly braces, we can specify the parameter room and the parameter object. So what types are they? That's what we need first. It's a GM, I believe, asset.room. This is, the name is room, the room to get objects from. I think that's correct. It is a room, right? Yeah, no, asset.gm room. I had this wrong. Asset.gm room. Alright, and then the other parameter, I don't use these documentation stuff very often, so excuse me if I'm doing this a little weird. Then GM, and this is an object. Is it an object? Yeah, GM object. And the name is object, and the object to get. And hopefully that works. If I look now at this, the helper functions does indeed seem to be working. So I'm going to just cut this line of code and repaste it in. And there we go, error's gone. Nothing to worry about. Kind of a tangent there, but it was kind of bothering me seeing that error. You should get in the habit of writing, I think they're called Java docs, these documentation kind of things, because it helps organize your code apparently, but I don't usually ever have issues if I don't. So don't worry about it if you don't want to, but if you want to get in the habit of it, it is good to do. Alright, so we have our transition objects now. So we're going to iterate through them. So for var I equals 0, I is less than array length trans, and then I++. var t equals trans I. So we're iterating through every single transition object in this room, and then we need to store their data in the map in the grid. So I will say var xx equals t dot x divided by grid size, and then var yy equals t dot y divided by grid size. And now we can say map question mark ID, or sorry, not map, the grid, and this needs to be hashtag xxyy equals a new object. So we're going to store the data in here. And what do we need to store? We need to store what room it's in. So room is going to be RM. We need to store what its identifier is. So we'll just say ID is going to be, and we can't just say ID. So how do we get this? It's actually t dot, I believe it's just image index. I think that'll work. And then we can store the x as xx and the y as yy. It's good to note that we're storing the grid position, not the actual pixel position of this transition object. All right, and now we need to store this in the map. So I'm going to say map and then question mark, and this is going to be based on its ID. So its ID is just t.imageindex, and that's going to be equal to, and I could copy and paste this whole bit of code, but I'm just going to actually say it's equal to grid xxyy. So these store the exact same object. The only difference is we can either get it based on its x and y position, or we can get it based on its index position. In fact, we can actually write a getter function for both of those right now. So let's say get transition equals a function, and this one will be based on an x and a y. I'll do cx and cy so that we know there's cell positions instead of pixel positions. So this is going to say get whatever transition is at this location. And in fact, we actually need to pass in a room as well. So what room is it in and what's the cell x and y position. So we're going to first say if grid question mark rm, and not grid, this should be map. If map room equals undefined, which means that's not a valid room, we can just return undefined. And then I can say just simply return grid hashtag cxcy. And this is actually completely wrong. This should have been data, and this should have been data rm dot grid. Because remember, this is all being stored in the data variable for the room, and then you get the grid out of that. All right, so that should be correct now. The next thing I did forget to do, I think, is I need to fill this grid up with empty positions. So if we come up to where we say data or the populate transitions, I'm just going to say grid or ds grid clear the grid, and we're going to fill it with just undefined. That way, by default, this variable get transition will return undefined if there's no transition there. But if there is a transition there, it will return this object here. Now we can say get transition, and this is going to be called ID equals a function. This is going to be taking a room and then the ID to get. And I could just copy and paste this probably. That should be fine. Except instead of getting it from the grid, we're going to get it from the map, and instead of an x and y, we'll say question mark ID. And that should work. All right, I think everything is done in here. If we go into our object networking now, so go to network, object network control, and actually we need to go to the network script. The network script, scroll down to its initializer, and you'll see where we say collider.init using client room. We're going to go right under there, and we're going to say meta objects.init. This doesn't take anything. And eventually we will take this collider init and we'll put it into meta objects init. So we will do that in the future though. For now, let's just try to get these transitions working. because there's a lot to do and we're already 20 minutes in. So alright, let's go in, and everything should be fine right now, but we need to go into our client object, client data, if I can find it, player data, scroll down, and we are going to come into our update position, and in particular update server is what I mean. And if we scroll down, this right here is where we move the player. So before we move the player, we need to actually check if there is a transition. So var t equals, and we're going to say meta objects dot get transition. We need to pass in the room. So for now, we're just going to do client room. And this takes in a cell X and a cell Y. So that can just be grid position.x and grid position.y. I can put these on a new line. And I'll say if t equals undefined, then we can do all this, which will just straight up just move the player. Else, that means we are moving into a transition, and we are going to actually create a new type of data. So I'm going to middle mouse click this to open up our network types, and we'll create a macro called n, and we'll call this a new room, and we'll set that equal to 7. Alright, back over here, we can say network.start and new room, network.write. We're going to do type ID, so we need to know who is moving, and that would be t's ID, I believe. No, that would be just ID, my bad. Then we need to know where we're moving to, so what room, network.write. We'll make this an ID as well, because I'm not really sure what else it could be. I don't fully know what rooms are stored as. I believe it's just like 0, 1, 2, 3, like just basic numbers, but just in case, I'm doing this anyway, and assign 16 should be fine. And we're just going to pass in what room we are moving to, so that would be t.room. And then we need to know the position that we're moving to, so network.write is a type position, and we're going to say t.x, and we can copy and paste that for t.y, and then I'm going to send all again, so network send all server sockets. And I just realized we actually have this slightly wrong. The tx and ty, that is the position that we moved into, the transition that we're moving into, but not the transition that we want to move to. So to figure out what the transition that we want to move to is, I want to create another variable var delta t, so delta transition, the one we want to move to. And for this, I'm going to say pretty much the exact same thing as this. So actually I can just copy and paste this in here, but name it delta t instead of just t. But this time we're not getting transition of a position. This time we do need the one for ID. And instead of passing in x and y, we'll pass in t.room. Not t.room actually, t.id. So this will get us the transition that we want to move to. And then we'll move all of it. And I could, if I wanted to, say if if dt equals or doesn't equal undefined, then do all this. That should be fine, just to make sure that it exists, but it should exist. If it doesn't exist, that means you didn't create the object in the room like you're supposed to. But that should be fine. We will also need to move the player, like physically move the player object itself. So if we come into our object, so this would be player controller dot players. So we're getting the array of players, and which player do we want? We want the one that is RID, and we'll store this in a variable. So var p equals that, and I will say p dot position dot x equals t dot x and p dot, and that's wrong. It's grid position. P dot grid position dot y equals t dot y, and then p dot position dot x equals t dot x times grid size p dot position.y equals t.y times grid size. Grid size. So this is just moving the player, like physically moving the position of the player to the correct place. Otherwise, when we moved, we'd remain in the same spot that we were in the last room. Alright, and now we need to have the client actually handle the data. So we are sending the data to this client saying, hey, this person wants to move to a new room. So he should move to this new room. And we're providing who's moving, what room we're moving to, and what the position of the new room is. And that should be dt.x and dt.y. Alright, so now under onDataClient here, scroll all the way down. And we're going to do a new case for the new, or n new room break. And now we need to get all the variables out of this. So ID equals network.read type ID, X equals, and actually we need to get the room first. So underscore RM equals network.read type ID again. We need the X and Y position. So network.read is a type of position, and Y is a network.read type position again. And that's everything. So first we're going to say if ID equals client.id. So that means it is, actually we'll do not for now. So if they are not equal, that means somebody else has moved to a new room. So it wasn't us who moved to a new room, like our player didn't move to a new room, but somebody else is trying to move to a new room. So we can just get rid of them fully. We don't need to see them, we don't need to worry about them. So I can just say, I believe this is player controller dot remove player, and we're going to remove ID. We'll just straight up remove them for now. Alright, and we'll do else. So this is the case if it is us trying to move to a new player. I can probably say if room exists, RM, room go to, RM. Alright, and we'll also need to do basically the same stuff we did up here with this moving a player. So I want to copy and paste all of this, because now the client needs to physically move the player to the right position. Var p, we'll just say p, player controller ID, and this should actually just be client.id instead, and everything else should be fine. So we're moving everything there. It's not t.x though, it is now just underscore x. So we'll fix that. So instead of t.x, it's underscore x underscore y, because that's the variable we started as up here. But other than that, let's see what we have now. We'll run the game. I'm sure I'm missing something, but I can't think of it on the top of my head. So we're just going to move and immediately get an error. Data room grid is undefined. So it's not grid is undefined, it's just we're not getting data room. Alright, I'm going to close that. That was a server that crashed. So let's look at the error code down here. This is happening under meta objects line 48. So let's go there. Line 48 is right here. We're trying to return data rm.grid, but it's saying that this is undefined. So is that really what we called it? Yep, it's called data. It's a map. Data rm, which is rooms I, equals this. Populate transition, which sets grid. Map and grid. DS grid create. I'm just checking over everything, making sure we're not missing something silly. My best guess would be that we are somehow calling this before we set it. And there's a couple ways we could try that out, but my other guess would be that, did we forget to call init? I don't think we did. We definitely didn't, thinking about it. In fact, I could probably print this out and check. Show debug message data question mark rm, and I'm actually going to move this down below here. And if we run this, we should be able to see the rooms, which we do. And this isn't called a grid. That might be the issue, but I don't think it is, because it's supposed to be called transition grid and transition map. But it doesn't say that's what the error is when it actually crashes. It was saying that data RM was undefined. But we'll try it again anyway. See what happens if I move. Oh, I guess that was the issue. That was weird. The error code kind of said it in a weird way. But if I move to the right, or to the left, I guess, that's not what's supposed to happen. That's related to the server. The server still thinks we're moving, so don't worry about that too much. The issue is a client error, I think. RM not set for reading it. Yep, that was a client error. So that would be under on data client. We are using RM instead of room somewhere. Okay, right here. Room exists RM. That should have been underscore RM. Okay, we can try this again. One more time. Hopefully this works this time. Alright, so it's jumping around a little bit, but not quite in the correct way because we're not even moving to a new room. Even though we said room go to room, which means we might be trying to transition to the wrong room. Well, obviously. So let's go to our server where we're moving the player data. We are trying to set it to T room, which means either this is the wrong value or it's not set and instead it's returning just like 0 for another reason. Because I'm guessing client room is room 0. So let's make sure that we're actually setting it to the word room and nothing else a little crazy. And it should be T, right? T is the right one, I believe. Oh, you know what? When we copied this, we're getting the DT of client room instead of client room 2. This won't be hard-coded in the end, but for now we're just going to set it to 2. That was the reason. It's getting the transition out of the wrong room. Okay, run the client again. 4th time's the charm. All right, we moved, so I'm not pressing anything. I'm just moving around a lot. I also didn't go to the right room again. Sorry, I had a cough again. I haven't recorded a video in a couple days, and it's making my throat a little sore. Wow, we're 33 minutes in. This is gonna be a 40-minute video. Longest one to date, probably. You should have saw how long it took me to actually practice doing this because I had to plan this out. Anyway, I had this problem actually at the same time I was trying to figure out what was wrong, but this is likely related to a positioning thing. I'm guessing our server's position isn't quite up to date with what it's supposed to be. So it's just trying to make us move to the left constantly. It's either the server or the client. One of the two isn't updating its position properly. So if you remember in the player, in order to stop moving, we have to be in the correct position. They should be perfectly equal. So we are setting the grid position, which is grid position, and then position is the real world position. And the same thing happens here. And just make sure this is the correct player. Player's I, PI goes this, which is a grid position, XY, XY, times grid size, dot to time. I'm trying to remember, I think there's something I'm missing in terms of what I need to set. So I should, actually I should clear out the key presses. That might be it. So if I go to P dot, or DS list clear and I'm going to say p.keypresses, so it says we're not pressing anything. I don't think that's actually the issue. That could be, but it's very unlikely. And we are passing in dt.x, and oh, that's the issue. You know what? We're using t, x, and ty here, but we're using delta time or dt here. So I believe these should be dt instead of just t. Man, my naming for these variables are awful. But just remember, dt is delta transition, so where we're trying to move to. Try again, get the nice swimmer guy. All right, we did move to the right, but again, we're moving to the wrong room. So if I go to my client room, let me just make sure I did set this right, didn't I? If I look at the creation code, yeah, it's trying to move to room 2, or it's setting it to room 2 at the very least. And that's the same for both of them, right? Oh, you know what? We're never calling this, are we? So how do we even get the room? Like how did, okay, you know what? Yep. I think I know the issue. So go into the meta objects now. So right here, we're setting room equal to just RM, which is the room that it is in. But we want to get that creation code and call the creation code to get what room it's supposed to go to. Because right now, it's just setting it to whatever room it's in, which is completely wrong. So how do we get the creation code? Well, we can just say t dot, and I think it's just creation code. That's definitely not correct. Let me look in the docs. If you go to the docs for room, get info, instance info, oh yeah, it is. It's just creation code, which is just a function. So yeah, you can just say creation code, and then you can do 2 round braces like that, and this will call the creation code, and our creation code returns the value. Run this one more time. I have very high confidence right now, which is always bad. What are we on, the 6th try? All right, there we go. We actually transitioned to the other room. If I run another player, you're going to see a lot of issues right now, though. A lot of issues we can't fix in one episode. For one, both players are still appearing on both screens, even though this guy is in a whole nother room than this person. So we'll have to do some work to clear that out. Another issue is that this player, like if you go to this room right now, you can't move to another room. You can't go backwards at all because it's hard coded in. Third issue, our collisions are broken right now. So the collisions are still using the collisions from the other room, which is obviously wrong. We need to update the collisions at this point. So a lot of things that need to happen, but we're already at 40 minutes and we just barely got room transitions working. So isn't that fun? One thing you can look at that's kind of cool though, hopefully this will work. If I move one player to the left just quickly and I move this one, if you move to the left on the other screen, they disappear. So at least that's working. I mean, that's one thing at least. Anyway, but it doesn't, of course, it still doesn't disappear on this screen. But anyway, that is going to do it for this episode. So next time, we'll continue working on these transitions to clean some stuff up. From this point on, everything, like all those bugs, should be much easier to fix and deal with than actually setting it up like we did now. So the bulk of the work was this. Anyway, that's going to do it. Until next time, I'll see you later.